More than 2 decades ago, I ran an airplane out of gas with my pregnant wife and 3-year-old son on board. This video is not intended to be an accident report. There's already a probable finding on file, and I'm not here to relitigate that. I'm going to spend a few minutes to tell you the story about what happened, and then I'm going to tell you what it cost me, and that part's not about airplanes. If you fly, I hope you stick around. There's some good lessons in here that I paid a lot for. And even if you don't fly, I hope you stick around, because this story is really about a man who made the worst mistake of his life and the aftermath. Spoiler alert, everybody walked away. Nobody had a scratch by the grace of God. But I spent the next 20 years carrying the weight of what it cost me. This is my first video in an aviation series, and we're starting here for 2 reasons. First, it's the very beginning of a long career in aviation. But secondly, and more importantly, it's the day that shaped all the others most. A little bit of background. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps at 17 years old, and I was originally trained as an avionics technician. And early on in my training, I was afforded the opportunity to go to a simulator, and from that point on, I was hooked. I had to do whatever it took to become a pilot myself. So within a couple of years, I got selected for an enlisted to officer program. Eventually did the officer training, and then it was off to flight school. But before flight school officially started, the Marines would put you in a 25-hour program to make sure it was a fit for you, a fit for the Marine Corps. So I got 25 hours in a Piper Cherokee, and then before my flight school officially started, I paid out of pocket for the extra 15 hours to get my private pilot's license. That's typically what it takes, 40 hours for a private pilot's license. Most people take between 6 and 12 months to get their license. I did it in 53 days because I was doing it every day and I was very determined. And that's something I was pretty proud of at the time. Something I should have actually been afraid of. Looking back, I was pretty good at the stuff you see, at the takeoffs, at the landings, pretty much anything hand and eye coordination. But the part that needed time was the judgment, and it's no different for any pilot. Good judgment in the cockpit takes time, and that takes reps. I had 2 main things that were really driving the boat at that season of my life. I had this incessant need to constantly prove myself to other people, but most of all, to prove my abilities to myself. I think I was trying to outrun a wound, and that's something I'm still processing through. Something from before this period, to where I always had to prove I was good enough. The second thing, I was pretty rebellious. Pride had really kind of got to a pretty high level in my life, and I was rebellious towards God, towards the things I knew I should be doing and the things I should not be doing. I was kind of just doing whatever I wanted to do with that season of my life. A couple of weeks before the accident, I had a very vivid dream, and I've only had a few of these in my life, but when you have them, you can't forget them. And so in this particular dream, I was in the back of our van at the time, in the back row. Nobody else was in there. Nobody was at the driver's wheel. And I remember looking around, and off in the distance, far distance, there was a tornado that was just tearing everything up. I remember having some fear. And then my worst fears were realized because the tornado started coming directly at me, and I started to panic. And I remember thinking, I'm going to die. And then there was this still small voice that said, call out on the name of the Lord and you will be saved. And so that's what I did. I started to call out on Jesus' name. Jesus, please don't let me die. Please don't let me die. And then like that, the tornado dissipated and it was a clear day. I woke up, cold sweat. Thought, what the heck was that? Well, the next night I had the exact same dream again. And from there, I just kept living my life, doing whatever I was doing. So a couple weeks later, I'd finished the ground school portion of my military training, and now it was time to go learn how to fly the T-34 the next Monday. So I had a 3-day weekend, and I wanted to take advantage of that. So I told my pregnant wife at the time, we're going to rent this plane. we're gonna fly 3 hours to see my aunt. She wasn't really into it, but I was pretty strong-willed at the time. So I convinced her to go, our 3-year-old son. And on my way home from work, I stopped at the place I was gonna rent the airplane to check that it had fuel, because sometimes that might take an hour or two to get an airplane fueled up. I didn't want to wait for that when it was finally time to go. So I climbed up on the step, looked into the wing of a Cessna 172. It looked completely full to me. So I went home, got my wife, got my child, came back around 2 p.m., did my pre-flight, checked the gas again. It looked completely full to me. But here's the thing. It had flown for a half an hour in the pattern before that. I didn't know that. All of my training had been in a Piper Cherokee, and they focused on the tabs and visually checking, because you couldn't rely on gauges in these old airplanes. You had to think about your time of flying and your fuel burn, and you had to verify that you had fuel in the tanks before you left. So visually, these looked full to me. I had a total of 5 hours before this takeoff in a Cessna 172. So we take off, heading towards my aunt's house, and about 15 minutes before the incident, I began to notice that the fuel was pretty low on the gauges, which concerned me greatly. We had only been flying for about 2.5 hours, so I started to tell myself, it's impossible. These gauges must be bad. I've never flown this airplane, or maybe I've flown it in the pattern. I can't really remember. But there's got to be something off with this. This machine should fly for 4 hours. So kept running the mental math in my head. We're 20 miles, marching towards 14 miles short of our destination. I begin to think about, okay, frequencies, get set up to land here. And then my wife noticed the fuel gauges and asked me, do we have a problem? And at that point, I started to get pretty scared, because she was making me think about something I was really desperately hoping wasn't true. But the problem is that the 2 closest airports, one of them was behind us and the next one was in front of us, was our destination, and I was about halfway in between. So I decided that we were going to press 14 more miles. Like I said at the time, maybe just a little more than 14 miles, and just praying that it would work out. And then 5 minutes later, the engine quit. If you've ever been in a small airplane, you know that those engines are pretty loud. But they're louder at altitude because the power's up. And then they're even louder because you've got the wind noise. It is a distinctly different noise when an engine quits and all you have is the wind noise. So as soon as that happened, I pitched for best glide, started working through all the procedures I was taught to try to get the engine back started again. But within a few seconds, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I knew what the problem was. And so it didn't take me very long until I kind of sunk down in my seat with the realization that I just killed myself and my family. And at this point, my wife was visibly shaken. My son in the back was crying. He knew that we were afraid, so now he was afraid. And I just had this defeated feeling, because all I could see around me was trees and forests, and it felt like rolling hills. We were probably at about 1,500 AGL, about 1,700 AGL when the engine quit. There were low ceilings, and so I was only a VFR pilot at the time, and I kept coming down to compensate for that. And I just remember thinking, we're gonna die. And somewhere in that process, I heard this still small voice call out on the name of the Lord, and you're gonna be saved. And I just remember begging God, please don't let us die here. God, please don't let us die here. You know, when you're in a moment like that, time slows down. And I began to do the life review, and I wasn't very happy with that. 25 years old at the time, having to face the reality of who I'd become, how prideful I'd become. So I'm praying, my wife's praying, we're descending. Somewhere in there, I begin to formulate a plan. I saw a field off to our left at a distance, and so I set up for a left base. And then when I turned final, first thing I noticed was there was power lines at the approach end of that field that I definitely did not want to run into. So I remember thinking, don't get so low that you fly into that. So as we passed the power lines, the next thought, or even slightly before that, was that's not enough field for me to get stopped in. So I slipped the airplane. And for the non-pilots, slipping the airplane means I put down my left wing, stepped on my right rudder, which causes more drag, helps you descend quicker. And so I slipped the best I could. Remember thinking the ground is wet. I hope that we don't, and it's a farmer's field, I hope that we don't just start tumbling as soon as we make ground contact. We touched down pretty fast, and I was not able to get the aircraft to a full stop. So down at the end of the field, there were some trees. I remember trying to steer between the big trees, and we clipped some smaller trees, which did some damage to the wings. There was a barbed wire fence, which grabbed the nose gear, ripped it completely back. We went through the fence into a dirt road, turned 90 degrees, almost if we had been driving down that road. Airplane come to a complete stop. We did not have a scratch on us. Nobody was physically injured. I had a sore knee for a couple of days after that. The only thing that I have surviving from that day, other than the three of us, and actually four, my daughter Katie was in the womb 5 months at the time. So the only physical thing that we took away was this. This was good old Stitch, my 3-year-old son's stuffed animal that we had gotten him, I don't know, maybe a year before this or something. When we went to Disney World, he took it everywhere. He was 3 years old at the time. He still has this. And he tells the vivid memory of remembering Stitch flew forward and into the dash of the airplane. And so I quickly got us all out of the airplane, but he made sure that I went back for Stitch, which of course I did. So after I began to process some of the data, here's what we figured out eventually. I flew for a total of 2.8 hours from takeoff until the engine quit. That's what the Hobbs meter said on the ground. So the engine had been modified to give it 180 horsepower. That's something I wasn't aware of. I was at low altitude because the weather was a little worse than forecast. But at the end of the day, I was the pilot in command, and I took off with an airplane that had at least a half an hour less of fuel than it should have had. And I should have been way more conservative about our fuel state. When I saw those gauges weren't matching what they should have, regardless of the time we had been flying, I should have stopped somewhere and got gas. That was the wise thing to do, and I didn't do that. So that part's my fault, and I own it. An FAA representative showed up pretty quick, checked the airplane. There was no fuel in it whatsoever. And their finding was pilot error, flight planning. So within a month or two, they had me come in and meet with them. I did a flight review. I had to demonstrate my ability to do flight planning, and then he waived the flight portion of that. I got to keep my license. The NTSB filed a report a few months after that, noting pilot error. Going back to the day after the accident, I had a gentleman who was responsible for the safety program where I rented the airplane, contacted me. Could not have been a kinder person, nicer person to me on the phone. We drove home later that day. I dropped the pictures off. I wrote reports. I basically did everything I could to cooperate with the investigation. So a few weeks later, he had me attend a meeting for all of the members, and it began with asking me to stand up and explain to everybody what happened, and I did. And then immediately following that, he took the floor. It became clear he was taking all of the information I'd given him over the past month and was now going to prosecute me. The end result of this is I lost my membership and was being fined over $30,000. I walked into that meeting humble and I left humiliated, which is a completely different thing. Thankfully, there were a couple of men that I think had strong integrity that helped me understand kind of what was happening behind the scenes. And the bottom line is I made a mistake, but we had insurance. The place I rented the airplane from had what you call whole insurance, at which any member would be only responsible for $500 if something went wrong. And then they offered additional insurance for $5 that would waive the $500 if something went wrong. So of course, as a new pilot, I signed up for that. What I didn't know, and really what all of the members didn't know, is that the leadership of the organization had decided to cancel the whole insurance a few weeks before this accident in order to save money. Most of these leaders were retired military officers. They actually contacted my commanding officer attempting to get me removed from military flight school to come after my security clearance, which would prevent me from flying military aircraft. Thankfully, my leadership in the Marines took pretty good care of me, supported me, had my back the whole way. So grateful for that. It's during this time that I learned how tough my wife was. So as soon as the writing was on the wall, I basically left that meeting in tears. She got angry. She went home, she preserved everything. She took everything off the website that she could find before they had an opportunity to pull it down. She built a file, she found a lawyer, and then eventually handed that file over to the lawyer. And after he took a look at it, he was confident that this was an insurance issue. The very woman that I drugged tooth and nail into this horrible, traumatic experience is the very woman who built the case to defend me. So we filed a lawsuit looking for a declaration that we didn't owe them anything. But then they countersued and they doubled the money. So now I was being sued for $65,000. About 9 months later, they deposed me. My lawyer deposed them the same day. Both of us to sign an agreement that we won't sue each other anymore. And I was more than glad to do that. I just wanted to go back to being a flight student and stop writing checks to a lawyer every month. So here's some of the things this accident bought me and some of the things it cost me. A good thing is, in over 20 plus years of flying after this, I never once got myself into a bad fuel situation. Not once. And as a flight instructor, I did everything in my power to impart that same discipline about fuel management in the students that I trained. So that's a good thing. I think that part made me a better pilot. A second good outcome from this is that I thought at any time my dream to fly airplanes could go away tomorrow. So on the days I was allowed to fly, I flew my heart out. And it's probably this appreciation for what I was able to do today that I might not be able to do tomorrow that helped me to be first in my class, to get my first choice of flying the F-18, to later get hired by 2 separate airlines when I was told by other pilots for 20 years that for 10 years, that you're gonna be unhireable to an airline. So I had something to prove. I had something to prove to them, and I had something to prove to myself. But here's the thing I've just recently started to understand. Going back to the night of the accident, when you go through something like that, there is a lot of adrenaline that takes over. And I just remember working through it with my aunt and my wife, all of the things that had happened, writing down every detail that I could remember. And then we went to sleep. But it was about 3 a.m. I woke up in a state of panic, crying profusely, with the understanding that I'd almost killed my wife, myself, and my children. And something I would never forgive myself of. That a rule I wrote for myself during this time is that my judgment might not be enough. And when it's not, people might get hurt. So I can't ever let my guard down. I gotta check and check and check again. It's made me hypervigilant. And that engine has never shut down going back to this very moment of the accident. Most aviators excel at compartmentalization. If you make a mistake, you take that, you put it in a box, you forget about it. That's like runway behind you. You focus on what lays ahead because that's how you overcome a bad day. If you make mistakes taking off the carrier and joining up with your wingman, you gotta let that go because maybe you've got bombs strapped under the jet that have to be delivered in very close proximity to Marines on the ground, so you can't have the stinking thinking in your head. And that's a good thing. But you also shouldn't forget a box that you never reopen is a different problem. I was very good at setting things aside for the moment, but never taking the time to come back and process them properly. If you're pretty good about taking the hard things and putting it into a box so that you continue on, you just gotta make sure you gotta go back, open that box, and process what's inside. A lifetime is way too long to carry that kind of weight. Here's another part that I've only begun to realize. I've told this story 100 times or more. And I have an acute understanding that it was by God's grace that we walked off that field. I sincerely believe at 50 hours, I was in deep water. I was writing checks my skill level could not cash. And by the grace of God, we all survived without a scratch on us. And that's true, and I give God all the credit for that. But I've also never really fully forgiven myself. It was a human mistake. I'm a human. I paid the price. But we have to have the ability to forgive humans when humans make mistakes. I just wasn't willing to forgive myself. So both are true at the same time. I got saved that day by the grace of God, but I've also never fully forgiven myself, so I carry the weight of that. This was a very traumatic experience in my life, and the thing I'm learning about trauma is that it can block us from healing from bad experiences. And I've had other traumas in my life, and I'm beginning to understand that these have actually compounded over time. So it's a work in process for me. Number one, there's a difference between confidence and competence, and you can't always know that until the engine quits. So do your best to remain teachable. Don't get out ahead of your skis. Know your limits. Number two, if you've made a mistake, own it. Lying is never the way out. If you're in a situation where you now have to be accountable to a governing body, cooperate. Just make sure you know what side of the table the person you're talking to is on. In my case, I handed somebody everything in good faith who used it in a very brutal way against me. So I would tell any young guy, know the difference between an investigation and a proceeding and use wisdom. There's people there that are going to help you. You just got to learn who you can trust and who you can't. Number three, don't ever conclude that your story has been completely written. For more than 12 years, I was told by pilots in the radio room and other people that I talked to, I was never going to get hired by a major airline. The thing everybody was certain was going to be the nail in my coffin was actually probably one of the things that went most well for me in those interviews. It's not the mistake that defines you, it's what you did with the mistake. In my case, I never once again got into a fuel situation, And hopefully, I prevented other pilots from ever getting into fuel situations because of my instruction when they were my students. So I took a very negative thing and I learned from it, and you can do that too. Most of us get a few events in our lifetime that define us in such powerful ways. There's the version of us before that day, and then there's the version of us after that day. This is one of those days that defined the rest of my life. And while I wouldn't want to relive any of this, I'm so thankful for the lessons that it taught me. Debrief complete.